Thank you very much. I mean, it's existential, and what a moving little vignette that was from Elsie. I just did a quick calculation. When Elsie was 8 years old, that was the last time that the same proportion of people born 30 years ago had the same proportion of owned homes as we do now. So we're back to 1926, and so the housing affordability crisis is above all, it's generational. Younger people now paying about 30% of their income on rent. It is rent, normally not mortgage, of course, as opposed to about 10% 30 years ago. So there's an absolute crisis of home ownership and affordability, which is marching its way through the generations, particularly but not exclusively in the southeast. So we can't afford to wait. We have to keep building. When you look at the ratio of homes to households, we've got the tightest in Europe. Got actually fewer homes than there are households without taking account of suppressed household formation. The average in Europe is about 1.12, and in the UK it's about 0.99. So the need is statistically unarguable.
Yeah, on breakfast, we spoke to David Gauke, who was I don't think he's a Tory MP anymore. He had a bit of a run-in with Boris Johnson and the Brexiteers.
No, I don't think so, no.
Back in the day, if you remember. But he was saying he wouldn't trust Liz Truss necessarily to become Prime Minister because he thinks she would just blow up the rule book on lots of things. In a way, isn't it a good option to have somebody who will blow up the rule book on the way we've been doing things for years, on things like housing? Because whatever we've been doing, it clearly hasn't worked. We need a complete revolution for how we deal with these things.
Well, it's certainly true that what we're doing now isn't working. I'm not going to comment on what Liz Truss would or wouldn't do. I'm not expert to do that. But I think it's important to understand the way in which regulation and planning works. Because, I mean, if you like, both the right and the left make a bit of a category error on this. On the right, it's assumed that sort of planning started in 1947 with nasty Mr. Attlee. And on the left, it's assumed that, well, the same, but, nice Mr. Attlee. In fact, we've always regulated the built environment. If you imagine I live in house A and you live in house B and it's the 12th century and I have a thatched roof and I burn my house down, I will probably burn your house down as well. So we've been regulating what we can build, like no thatch in London since the 12th century, for many hundreds of years, and the Romans did and the Greeks did. So it's, if you like, it's part of the irreducible core of what the state does. What's gone wrong in this country, particularly, is that we've stopped regulating in a predictable, simple way, and we've started planning in a complicated way. So we put all the onus on what's called development control. Right? That's do you win planning permission? Quite a telling phrase, to win it, as opposed to does this follow the rule book? There will always be rules in what you can and can't build, because there are quite hard to escape externalities on your neighbourhood and on requirements for water or whatever it might be. But what we do need to do is make a simple, more predictable system, and that will make it much, much easier, not just to rely on the volume house builders. We are outrageously, crazily reliant on the big volume house builders, and we've got, by some margin, the smallest self-build, custom-build, SME, local house builder market, pretty much in the West. So I think it's less throw away the rule book. It's more have a much simpler, clearer, more comprehensible rule book that doesn't act as a barrier to entry through high pre-planning costs and risk. So it's a complicated answer, but it's I think quite an important one.
So Nicholas, Richard, Chris, who's a GBNews viewer, got in touch. He said, I live in a rural area and thousands of homes are being built, supposedly affordable, right? But the cheapest is 450k. How do they expect people to afford this? Well, I mean,
there's no simple answer to that, I'm afraid. The nature of the places we've been creating and their affordability from people around here has gone systemically wrong over the last 30, 40 years. 2% of people trust developers. I think from memory, 7% trust the planning system. And if people don't think that they or their neighbours can live in these houses or will benefit from the place that's being created or extended or changed in whatever way, then 9 times out of 10, they will oppose the new housing, even when they recognise, as most people do, that new housing is required. So we've got to get back. I talk of moving from a sort of vicious circle of parasitic, unaffordable development into a virtuous circle of regenerative development. Unless people have confidence, they know what it's going to look like, they know where it will be, they know that they or the neighbours or people like them or people they know will be able to afford to live there. Unless you get into that virtuous circle, people will continue to oppose housing in practice, even though they say they don't in principle.